Hey, what's up, guys? Today we got some boss fights. These are my second and third bosses that I fought in the DLC so far, meaning that the first boss that we fought was from the last vid in Castle Ensis, and then the one you're seeing on screen is the second boss we fought, which I believe is meant to be fought first, but we fought it second, and then afterward, later on in this video, you'll see the third boss we fought. All our attempts at killing those bosses are in there. So for my attempts here, unfortunately, I was expecting when I opened the door that I could buff after I opened the door. So our first attempt, we entered the boss room without our buffs, and the boss is a little bit of what I want to talk about for this particular vid. It's the importance of your setup. It's not just the skills that is going to determine the outcome of the boss fight. I think that is pretty obvious. Even if it's just picking the proper talisman, it's not even just picking the right weapon. Picking the proper talismans and choosing the right buff to start the fight, the right Ash of War, is also a big part of it. One of my favorite Ash of War, for instance, which we don't use here, I believe, because we start the fight abruptly and we did not have time to set up, basically. But one of my favorite Ash of War is Bragger's Roar. The reason why I like Bragger's Roar so much for boss fights is that not only does it give you 10% offense for around a minute, but it also gives you 10% damage reduction. It's not just physical damage reduction, it's straight damage reduction. Just for a point of comparison, 10% is the exact same as the defense physic. The defense physic also gives you 10% flush damage negation across the board. So when you have the physic and Bragger active, it's basically as if you had two physic active, and you can also stack two Bragger if you're power stancing one weapon with Bragger's Roar in the offhand and another one in your main hand. So that's one particularly useful, underrated Ash of War that you can use for boss fights, especially if you don't plan on doing the bulk of your damage with your Ash of War itself. Also, it's less FP it has less FP consumption to just use your Ash of War for a buff, obviously. For the fight itself, I did not particularly like this boss, unlike the first one I fought, and for two simple reasons. The reason number one is, I don't know if it's going to show up on screen, but there was some pretty heavy frame drops every time the boss would do any attack with particle effect. Like the frame would just drop, and I am playing on the PS4 version of the game on PS5, and unfortunately this made it quite distracting, I would say. And the second thing I did not like about this boss is if you are fighting this boss up close, a lot of time you're going to be fighting the camera. The camera is very often inside of the boss or obscured by various particle effect depending on your placement around the arena. Obviously when you're further away there's no issue, but when you start to get more close and personal with the boss, like here for instance, you see that it gets a little bit all over the place, and then it's hard to distinguish what type of attack or what type of delay the boss is attacking you from. So this is for this particular boss. Other than that, I think we did fairly decent against this boss. However, I do believe that this is one of those bosses that's not that difficult to get on your first run if you are prepared for it. However, we did not get it on our first try, unfortunately, but it's okay. You know, you just adapt and you try harder for the next one. Another tip for bosses, I mean, I don't think this is really a tip, but guys, status. The bosses, when you don't do a lot of damage to them, you can still status them. It's honestly like, it's the best way to deal damage to bosses. It's to status them, whether it be rot, whether it be poison, whether it be bleed, frost. It's never a bad idea to go for status proc against these bosses, even if you are not an arcane build. I should mention that bleed builds, or bleed infusions, poison infusions, and so forth, are actually pretty damn strong on all physical builds, whether it be dex, whether it be strength. You don't necessarily need an arcane build. Like in this particular clip, I believe we are on the dex build still, fighting this particular boss. Even though our weapon is blade infused, this is on the dex build. Other than that, your backhand weapon is also something to consider. The icon shield is a good guess. Depending on what you're fighting against, you could have something else as a backup weapon. There's a few things that are good options in my opinion. There's the spiral horn, which resists status, depending on if you're fighting a boss that has hefty status procs. Obviously, though, the icon shield, you can't go wrong with that, as long as your build has the weight ratio to account for it. If you do not have the weight for it and you won't get any benefit from anything on your back, you're probably better off just scrapping the shield on your back or whatever item you have on your back and just go for straight up as much armor as you can in order to resist more of the boss's attack. That's also something that I would say as a little tip for fighting these bosses. For this particular boss, this is our second try right here, and my goal is to not just focus on dodging, but also focus on dishing as much damage as I can every time I get close to him. So if the boss is going to hit me, I want to be able to hit him back too. So this can be dangerous when you don't know the boss's moveset, but I mean, you need to dish damage back. Like, when you get damaged by a boss like that, if you have a lot of defense like I have on this character, it's worth to go for trades sometimes. Speaking of defense, everything that I'm doing to resist as much in these fights is I'm stacking a bunch of defensive options. I use the crab, which gives a good physical defense reduction. I know it's 10% in PvP. I don't know if it's 15% in PvE. I'm not too sure. Obviously, if you have Black Flame Protection on your build, that's even better. Like we mentioned earlier, there's the Defense Physic, which gives a damage reduction 10% across the board in PvP. I don't know if it's the same in PvE. And then Bragger's Roar again. These things are not to be underestimated because they all stack, and you add on top of that the physical damage reduction talisman and also the ritual shield talisman, which decreases the damage taken when you're full HP. You could also instead stack, for instance, an elemental damage reduction talisman with the physical reduction talisman to get, you know, as much coverage as you can. It really depends on the boss and which type of attack the boss is doing. Like, for instance, I believe in this fight we went for physical talisman for damage reduction and lightning because we saw him doing a bunch of lightnings, and I think I got hit a few times by that in the first bout. So these are pretty much all the things I wanted to say about you know, little tips and tricks. For the rest, enjoy the second boss fight. Oh, there's a boss. Bro, I was not ready for this. What's the percentage of defense that this has on the block? 80%, that's pretty good. You know what? That block is nice. He's now a porcupine. Oh, I just went in there. I'm dead. Okay, well, I wasn't ready for a boss fight. Can I f***ing grab my runes, you I was just fighting the camera again. Great. That was extremely sloppy. Whatever, we got it.